Comedian and satirist Conrad Koch, Chester Missing's puppet master, says South Africa should engage in robust dialogue to address the negative effects apartheid has had on all areas of society. He wrote recently in the City Press on what he termed the A to Z of white privilege, where he argued that the proceeds of apartheid should be filtered down to the poorest of the poor. He has called on the very rich, especially among white society, to think hard about how they can contribute generously to the well-being of poor, ordinary South Africans. We spoke to him recently and we asked him if his comments were not being anti-white.
It's not anti-white. It's just trying to be reasonable about history. White people aren't evil or wrong or really guilty because we didn't choose to be who I am. I got born into being where I am. But there is a system that's given advantages to white people, and that we should talk about that doesn't seem like it should be a big surprise. It seems a bit strange that people would be upset about that. Surely, you know, if we've had such an evil system, which apartheid was one of the greatest atrocities of the last century, surely we should talk about the consequences of that, and that shouldn't be a problem.
How are you received in your own society with these kind of utterances, if one may ask you?
Very well, I think, for the most part. I mean, there are a few people that scream and shout, but most white South Africans, if you explain the dynamics, they don't want to ride on other people's lives, which is what apartheid made them do. And I think if you can explain reasonably to them without hectoring and screaming, many of them, not all of them, but many of them are quite reasonable about listening. And a lot of them are very aware of the dynamics. So you don't always see them because they, don't always make that much noise, which can be sort of compliance by silence.
Don't you think this is in some way further isolating them and forcing them to cycle their wagons and stay away from the rest of what is perceived to be reconciliation per se?
Well, that's exactly been the whole problem. You see, when President Mandela and everyone came in and negotiated a settlement, the concept was you mustn't scare away white people, mustn't scare away white investment, and must include them in the economy, or include them in the conversation. They owned the economy and still mostly do. So the whole story has been compromising for where white people are at culturally. It's not that white people are bad or wrong. It's not like most white people chose that. It's just kind of a power we automatically have because statistically we earn in general a lot more than people of color. It's not something I chose to be, but it is the way it is, which means that when it comes to what TV show gets shown, what products they sell at Pick and Pay at Woolworths, and what radio stations get the most advertising spend, that will be influenced by tastes that I like. So I have power as a white person that I don't intend to. Also bear in mind that world culture is more similar to my culture, especially I'm first language English speaker, so even more so than Afrikaans people. I think Afrikaans people have more reason to complain than I do. Not that I think any white person really has a right to complain, because we're doing better now than we ever did. So the idea that we'll be isolated and scared away is really completely ridiculous. We are earning more now than we did during apartheid per capita, and adjusting for inflation. We are, there's some affirmative action and stuff, but 70% of senior management are still white. 21 years into democracy, 70% of senior management are still white. So it's not that they're evil or wrong, but hey man, we're only 10% of the population, and 70% of top jobs.
Let me interject you there.
Surely there must be a conversation. That's all.
What kind of a conversation would you like to see take place?
I just think we can be more reasonable about what history did for us as white South Africans. and I know lots of white South Africans already are, so this isn't even all white South Africans, but there's a degree to which there's kind of a foot dragging about stronger taxation of wealthier people. There's a lot of foot dragging around, should we apply broad-based black economic empowerment? And I'm not talking about the simplistic Tokyo Sekhuale, Cyril Ramaphosa situation. I'm talking about where actual equity goes to more working class black people, where their rights are defended, and that we make sure that businesses are forced to transform. I think that the resistance to that needs to be less from white people, and perhaps some sort of wealth tax and general cultural acknowledgement that, you know, it's not because we're awesome that we're not the ones in the shacks. It's not because we are harder working. It's because we have a history that gave us a whole series of cultural and economic advantages that you simply are being a chop to deny.
Look, President Jacob Zuma came out very strongly in his State of the Nation address to say reference to the word apartheid will come often, and white society should not take this as some kind of an indication that they are being reminded of the past. How do you actually find this to be sitting among the community that you live with as white society? The word apartheid, does it scare them? Do they think it is unnecessary? Do they think people should just forget about this word and move forward?
Well, Comrade Musi, you see, the problem is that, first of all, just because of how I look doesn't mean that's who I hang out with. So my friends are very diverse. So I don't know if I'm a spokesperson for white society. In fact, I'm pretty confident I'm not. But based on, you know, what I hear and I see, I think some people are very scared. It's not that they don't agree with the past, but they feel like they're being hectored and blamed. And often that is not actually in the writing. I know Varashni from the Mail and Guardian wrote something on white privilege this week as well. And I saw some of the responses were, why are you blaming us? And she's saying, I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying, to some degree, white families accumulated more wealth. I know they're poor white people, but in general, it's more white people who have wealth than black people. That's an incontrovertible fact. And once you've got that on the table, I think white people just get scared, and I think that there needs to be a degree to which they just man up a bit, because how long can you hug people and make them feel safe?
Speak of incontrovertible, you mentioned the issue that the Oppenheimer in the way that you refer to them. I would want to think that you are referring to the Oppenheimer family and their business dynasty. As per the figures, Nikki Oppenheimer, beneficiary of that system, is at more than 6.5 billion US. You are saying that it's time to return the loot. If any mechanisms were to be put into place, how do you even begin to return the loot, as you say, without thinking about the entrepreneur workmanship that was put into building those enterprises?
Musi, remember that the article wasn't written by me, it was written by my little puppet comrade Chester Missing. So Chester sometimes says things in a playful, cheeky way, which I think he was doing there. But I mean, I think what he's referring to, you have to ask him, but I think what he's referring to is the idea that corporate South Africa never really accounted for how apartheid benefited them. You see, apartheid, first and foremost, was a system of economic disadvantage. It was a way to get cheap labor by making black people live in homelands, and then by that logic, they didn't need to be paid that much because they supposedly had farmland, which they didn't, but we believed they did. And then they could come into the city and get paid a pittance. And those businesses that thrived based on that system, they never really dealt with that post-apartheid. So I don't know what the solution is. I just think that surely we should have had some conversation. If people call for an economic codessa, bear in mind you're talking to a puppet guy. I talk to puppets. We shouldn't be asking me for economic solutions.
You touched lightly. I would want Chester to actually comment on this one, because you touched lightly on the issue of the K word, which will remain a part of what we stand for as a society. It is part of our history. But I think if you asked the second or the third black person, you'd find them to be saying it is not only white people who'd use the word. You know, even if you look at its origins from the Arabic, which would have meant pronounce something like kafir, meaning a non-believer. Do you think that this is still a rampant word that is being used, and do you think that we need to move? There are problems that we are confronting, a serious debate it is necessary to address this?
Yes, we do need more solid debates on race, and the K word is like an epicenter point around that. I mean, I know a very good friend of mine, black comedian, the only time he's ever been called the K word to his face is by colored people. But the fact is that we have complex racial dynamics. So when I use, if I were to use the N word or the K word, it comes with such advantage on my side and such a level of historic unfairness that I think the impact of that is more severe. It doesn't make it okay when various people of color call each other the K word. Rappers use the N word in rap all the time. I just think there needs to be a more nuanced and complex understanding. Say again?
Then they are comfortable with that if they use it among themselves.
Well, you just have more license because I grew up in a family that's benefited from apartheid. It's at least, it's not like we were part of apartheid, and it's not like we got given houses or anything by apartheid, but the fact is that my parents would have had economic chances and grandparents have economic chances that a black person just wouldn't have had. So when I use a word that is so divisive, it has a kind of more cultural impact.
Do you find yourself?
Remember, the reason words are important, Musi, is because they create cultural boundaries. So when I use the K, if I were to use the K word on a black person, what I would be doing would be to create you are not like us. And the whole problem of economic access when you're trying to get a job or whatever is that you for centuries not been allowed access to the boardroom to be an executive. We believe that executives sound and look in a certain way. There's actually academic research on that. And the more you enforce a language that is divisive and creates the other, the less access people have culturally. It can start sounding airy-fairy, but in real terms, we all know what it's like to kind of be sidelined by a group of people.
The letter Z, which makes inference to Zuma and which would take us to President Jacob Zuma. Do you think that there is a feeling among the white community, as you stated in that piece of article, do you think that the reception is that nothing has been achieved in this democracy, whether it is during President Jacob Zuma's tenure or it is within his predecessor's tenure?
I don't think there's anything I can say about white South Africans that is true for all white South Africans outside of that to some degree, greater or lesser, we benefited from apartheid. That is the only truth you can say, I think.
The bone of contention.
So do white South Africans think Jacob Zuma has done a bad job or that they think the ANC's, I think there's varying degrees. And I think the problem is that there's so many ways that Jacob Zuma does use apartheid as a foil. I mean, why were we buying guns and building in Kandla while we had Eskom falling apart? Why wasn't the money going into, I think the biggest scary thing is the lights turning off, not Mozambique driving in and shooting at us. So at the same time, I think white South Africans often, generalizing it, don't acknowledge the huge amount of infrastructure that had to be built up that just wasn't put in place in previous homelands, the roads and hospitals and schools that we have actually built. There's a huge amount of people got electricity, houses, access to water, the basic income, but the different grant system has really saved millions of people from extreme poverty. So to say that, I think that sometimes some white South Africans don't acknowledge that enough, and that can become very unfair because it effectively doesn't admit the past, and that's dangerous because when the president uses apartheid as an excuse where he shouldn't, it kind of becomes dangerous because you can't argue with him because you haven't, if white South Africans don't acknowledge, but apartheid did do this. So when he goes, apartheid did this, we must go, yes, it did, but it only went there. There was you. And because that conversation, it's two sides not really budging.
There are two sides to that coin. I know I can't really trust puppets. Are you telling me Chester is not there?
Yes.
He's not.
I'll ask him if he'll come out. Let me just, Chester, bro.
Please,
Where are
I
we?
need to
We're
have a
here
word
at,
with him. Is he there? Is he there? Bring him
where
up
are we
because
anyway? Is he going on
he
about
has a lot
white
to-
privilege again? Yes,
Oh,
sir.
you had a few stripes on that tie because I
can't-
asked your master about the red tie and wanted to know if you were
My
communist.
master? What? This isn't the 80s guy. He's not my... He's riding in my career, man.
Comedian and satirist Conrad Koch and his puppet Chester missing. The two were responding to a recent City Press article where the comedian took a swipe at what he summarized as white privilege as a result of apartheid.